Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm hiding out again back here in the warehouse again. And we've got some more stuff in here and it's not quite as echoey as it was, but it's still a little lively sounding in here and there's nothing I can do about that today. So at least it's a quiet place that I can shoot a video in real quick. So let's get right into it. This is an interesting one that someone sent in. This is a Monitor Audio Gold version, and it's the model C250. This is a dedicated center channel speaker that they offer. And the customer sent in a pretty good little letter with it and basically said it's a bit irritating to listen to at times. And after looking at what's there, I bet you're right. I bet it is a bit irritating. It's a pretty hot, hard to listen to speaker, just going by what I can see. Knowing what's here, I know this is going to be something that's going to be a little bit sharp and harsh and bright, and yeah, it could be a little much, especially with these metal cone drivers. Nice looking speaker, three-way speaker, two woofers in parallel. It does drop down to 4 ohm load. In fact, the minimum impedance dropped to 2.8 ohms. We'll look at that in a minute. A little dangerous there for some of those cheapy receivers out there, that's for sure. Air motion type transformer, a Heil type tweeter, a little mid underneath it. Parts quality, there are some polypropylene caps and some air core inductors, it looks like maybe on the mid or tweeter circuit that are fair. The rest of the parts, like you'd expect in anything in these lower price points. Iron core inductors, sandcast resistors. I mean, let's take a look at it. We took a picture of the crossover. Let's throw that up and take a look at it. You can see what I mean. So kind of a mixed bag. And I think there was 16 parts in total on this thing. And it's got some fancy binding posts on the back. Look at their dual wired, bi-wire, bi-ampable. Ooh. And it's on a heavy metal plate. And the cabinet's gorgeous, beautiful piano black and some type of a rubber mat on the top of it, which I don't know, maybe that helps deaden the sound a little bit, or maybe it's for you to set your drink on or something. It's whatever. It looks pretty nice. The binding post plates look nice. Look at all that gold coated brass, and on the backside, oh yeah. You guessed it. The terminals that this stuff connects to is steel, and the nuts that the whole signal's having to pass through, it's steel. So it's like pretty on the outside, cheesy on the inside. So let's look at how well they did on the design aspect of this thing. Let's look at an on-axis frequency response. Can you tell why the customer felt like it might be a bit irritating at times? I can. It definitely is hot up top. That big peak around 1800 hertz, definitely going to make things a bit bright. Definitely a little in your face. That's not a region that you want a level of brightness. I know a lot of people think brightness, that's up there at the very top, like 10K to 20K. That's not where brightness comes in. Brightness is usually in that 1,000 to 2,000 region. That's where your treble region is. That's where a lot of your upper level harmonics start. And that's where things can get a little bit much. Now, this is also, being a three-way design, you'd think they'd take that mid and they'd push that mid down into a range where it's covering some mid-range. That is not the case. This mid-range cross to the woofers at 1200 hertz. At that point, you might as well just put a good tweeter in the middle, because it's not playing down low enough for when you get off axis, left or right, that the woofers are canceling each other and causing a hole, and the mid's not playing low enough to pick it up. So that's one of the reasons you typically see some center channels as a tweeter mid, and then the woofers on either side. That mid is to play down low enough to fill that off-axis gap so that you have a broader coverage area. So let's see how that worked out for them. Let's look at the horizontal off-axis, and you can see it dropped off pretty heavy right there. There's a pretty good little hole left or right. So Where's the advantage then of adding the mid? I don't get that. And then let's look at the vertical off axis. Of course, that's right in front of it, going up four inches per measurement at a meter. And it's pretty consistent that way, as you would expect, because we're not moving off axis that much. So whether you're seated or standing or anything like that, you're in a pretty good range. Let's look at the spectral decay, though. The spectral decay is fairly clean. I'm not seeing a lot of stored energy there. Right in that 1800 hertz region where there's a little bit of a hump, there's a little bit of excess energy there, but not very much. A couple of little trails there alongside it, but I would call that overall extremely clean. Much cleaner than most of the speakers that come in here. So they've designed this in a way that the drivers are well damped and they're staying out of the ranges where they ring or break up. Pulling up the impedance curve, you can see this is a really low impedance. It does drop to 2.8 ohms. At least it's dropping to that low impedance at the top end of the frequency range where there's less current demand. Still, it's a 4 ohm load, flat 4 ohm. In fact, I measured 4.07 ohms. It's a minimal dip there. So keep that in mind when you're hooking it up to receiver. You need to make sure that it's designed to handle that lower impedance load. And why companies do that, I don't know. Center channels in any home theater speakers really should be 8 ohms or higher so that the receivers aren't just dying under the current demand of all these low impedance loads. In fact, you'll notice a lot of the receivers out there, they'll rate themselves at a certain wattage into 4 ohms or into 8 ohms, and it'll say all channels driven 8 ohms, and it'll have a power rating where that's the maximum amount of power it can deliver into all channels driven, because if you start ganging up a bunch of 4 ohm speakers, it can't keep up with that level of current demand. They just don't put enough power supply in those things to do that. So keep that in mind when you're hooking it up to stuff. Next, let's look at the individual driver measurements. So when I've got to look, I'm looking at something like this and I'm thinking, oh man, I'm gonna have to redesign all of this and fix problems. Look, there's amplitude problems. The mid needs to play down a little lower. I'm going to have to redesign this thing. So the first thing I do is look at the frequency response of each individual driver. Let's start by looking at the woofer's response. And yeah, you can see it has that rising response where it's got quite a bit of step loss and it's coming up and then it dives and then there's a huge peak after it that's a ton of stored energy and a lot of ringing. And I noticed whenever I shot this frequency response, just of the woofers, no crossover, and the sound that it made, I immediately knew it was metal cone drivers. In fact, I even said something to Hobbs when he was in the room when I was shooting the measurements, how you can always detect the sound of a metal cone driver compared to other types of materials. It just has a different harmonic structure to it. It's like a piano, a flute, and a cello all playing the same note. They're playing the same note, it's at the same frequency, same wavelength, but they don't sound the same. The harmonic structure of each of those instruments is very different, and your ear can perceive the difference in all of those instruments. Woofers are the same way. Depending on the different types of materials that are used, you can play the same note through them, but the harmonic structure will sound very different. It has a very different sound to it. So it's a little more difficult for it to recreate a specific sound that you're trying to make it reproduce. It always has a little bit of its own signature. Metal cone drivers like that sometimes sound a little more subdued in some ways, or a little more veiled in the way that they sound. They don't have a lot of internal damping, and some of that ringing that's within the cone tends to smear things just a little bit. I don't know. There's something about the sound of those that I can always detect easily, even if I'm behind the speaker and I'm just giving it an impulse response. You can easily tell that it's a metal cone driver. So that looked a little rough. Then went to the mid, shot the mid response, and it's got some humps. There's where those humps are that we're having to control. And I'm thinking, oh boy, yeah, this is going to be a little tough. And then shot the tweeter's response, and it wasn't too bad. Not bad at all. It doesn't play down very low, which is what I expected from this type of tweeter. Typically, these don't play down very low. Fortunately, the mid is pretty small and it can play up pretty high real easily, so I don't feel like there's any issue there. But let's look at an overlay of all the frequency responses together of the woofer, the mid, and the tweeter, and take a look at what I've got to work with when I look at this thing and I think, oh boy, this is rough, and I've got to create a balanced frequency response and keep each driver within a range that they're comfortable with playing within, and take into consideration a whole bunch of aspects and make it accurate, and that's what I have to work with. Oof. Not great. I mean, as soon as I looked at that, I thought I got my work cut out for me. This is not going to be as easy as I'd like. So let's take a look at what I came up with. Let's look at the old crossover response of when I shot the tweeter mid and the woofer individually from the stock crossover, and then let's right underneath it drop in the new crossover design that I created for this thing. You can see that I've let the mid play in a range that it's kind of comfortable playing. There was a huge peak there at about 1800 hertz. I've got a series notch filter at the front of this network that's attenuating that area, and it's allowing the other two areas to pass through. And then there's a crossover after it. So I was able to do something with it. Tweeter and woofer then roll into it, creating a really smooth response. I allowed the tweeter end to be up just a little way up top, because as you move off axis of this thing in any direction, it's going to start to drop off. So balance that out, took away the brightness, all that you see from 300 or 400 hertz all the way up to 3 or 4 kilohertz is nice and flat, nice and smooth. So that irritation is going to be gone. And let's look at just the frequency response independently. Let's look at the original frequency response and then the new frequency response, and you can see comparatively there's a pretty big difference there. So all that worked out great. Now let's look at the original horizontal off axis, that's moving left to right, compared to the new horizontal off axis. And I noticed with just even the raw drivers, as you move off axis, there's some roughness in its response. So it was hard to maintain a completely flat off axis response because the drivers just simply aren't smooth in the off axis. A lot of that is just due to the way these are mounted and edge diffraction and all kinds of things going on. But it's got a better coverage area now. And when I crossed the mid, I crossed it about as low as I could make it go. It did not want to go low. It's crossed at about 850 now versus the 1200. So it's better, not a whole lot better, but it's definitely better. Looking at the vertical off axis going up now, you can see that it maintains a pretty even response just like it was. And a little better in that regard, but it wasn't bad in that regard to begin with. Let's look at the spectral decay, and let's look at the before and after spectral decays. You'll notice I got some of those lumps out of it, and the spectral decay is even cleaner. That's going to give you a cleaner overall sound. And as important as anything, look at the impedance curves. Let's look at the before and after impedance curves, and you'll notice I was able to maintain a higher impedance load. We're at a minimum of 4.17 ohms, so I brought it up just a tad right there where the woofers are, and at the tweeter end I brought it up to where it's not going to be dropping down below 3 ohms. So overall, the new design of it is a whole lot better than it was as far as smoother, balanced, easier to listen to. And that's a lot of what we do when you send stuff in. Usually they come in for a reason. There's problems in amplitude or stored energy, or the cabinet is ringing like crazy, or there's phase issues and time alignment situations we have to correct. And basically we're just correcting those so that we've got an accurate response. Now, does that tell you how it's going to sound? No, but it tells you how accurate it is. It is a benchmark of accuracy, so that gives you an idea how things are going to sound. It gives you an idea how things are going to image, or how a speaker like this is going to sound as you move off axis. So a lot of useful information in the measurements, especially looking at the spectral decay. You can see, does it play and stop, or is there residual ringing going on? That's probably the most telltale of anything as far as measurements that tells you how a speaker really sounds. The rest of it is huge upgrade in parts quality. We're going to put together a little parts package, which this time is only 11 parts instead of 16 parts. So not only was I able to smooth this thing out, but I was able to do it with less parts. And those parts quality are going to go up by a lot. There's going to be better clarity and detail levels without the brightness. The bottom end is going to sound a little fuller and a little warmer, and it's going to be better for dialogue. So overall, huge upgrade. We're going to send out a set of tube connectors that you can replace one of these sets of these cheesy binding posts. If you want, and I always recommend this, you can parallel the old binding posts up to the tube connectors so that you can use either or. I love it when people do that because eventually they're going to go into a comparison mode where they plug that thing into the regular binding post and they plug it into tube connectors. And they always call and say, I can't believe how much difference the tube connectors made. So I'm going to put a little parts package together for this thing. We'll have it on our website. If you guys are interested in it, you can go and just upload that, or you can go and buy that thing, and we'll get that sent out to you for all of you who have this type of speaker. For those of you who don't, I hope you got something out of this video and understand a little bit about why we do the things that we do and that we work on what customers send us. We're not out there trying to bash different companies or knock them down. We don't look at these guys as competitors. We own a section of the DIY market. We have a DIY customer base, and we do really well selling our kits. This is like a side hustle. This is like less than 10% of our sales. We do this as a service. We do it for fun, and you guys seem to enjoy it a lot. You guys seem to really love upgrade videos, so as you guys ask us to do these things, we're going to keep putting them out there, and hopefully you're learning something from it that you can apply to things you're trying to do yourself. Maybe some of the manufacturers out there are learning a little bit from it too. I know some of those guys are watching. So that's it for this one. If you have any comments, drop them in the comment section below. Give us a like. Subscribe to our channel so it helps build our channel a little bit. And we'll see you guys in the next video.